Dust Creek, Arizona Territory,
I now
1887.
pronounce you
The
husband and
morning
wife.
sun cast long shadows across the
You
barren
may kiss the
landscape
bride.
as Jonas Calloway's boots crunched on the hard-packed earth. His Winchester rifle rested against his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who'd spent years in Apache territory. The ambush came without warning. A bullet splintered the wooden post beside his head. Jonas dove behind the dried-up water trough, drawing his Colt in one fluid motion. Two of Horace Glay's men emerged from behind the ridge, one with a shotgun, the other wielding a revolver. "Final warning, Calloway," the taller one shouted. "Sell or die." Jonas steadied his breathing, feeling the familiar calm of battle descend upon him. He'd survived 3 years as an Army scout, tracking hostiles through these same mountains. Two hired guns weren't about to take his father's land. The shotgun blast tore splinters from the trough. Jonas pivoted, fired twice. The first shot caught the gunman in the shoulder, spinning him backward. The second man retreated, dragging his wounded partner. "Tell Glay I've buried better men than him," Jonas called after them. "This land stays with me." Only when they disappeared did Jonas allow himself to feel the tremor in his hands. His canteen held barely a mouthful of water. The well had been dry for weeks. The cattle were dying. And now this, Glay's second attempt to force him off the land through violence. 3 days later, Jonas stood in the first bank of Dust Creek, hat in hand, pride in tatters. 10 days, Mr. Calloway." The banker wouldn't meet his eyes. "Then we auction the property to satisfy the debt." Outside, Jonas watched Horace Glay exit the saloon across the street. A man who'd arrived penniless 15 years ago now owned half the county. Tall, with silver-streaked hair and a watch chain that caught the sunlight, Glay moved with the confidence of someone who knew every man had his price. Their eyes met. Glay smiled, beckoned Jonas over. "A drink for a dying man?" Glay's voice carried the slick accent of Eastern money. He pushed a whiskey across the table. "I heard about the foreclosure. Terrible shame." Jonas left the glass untouched. "What do you want, Glay?" "To offer salvation." Glay leaned forward. "Silver's been discovered near Rattlesnake Ridge. My operation needs water. Lots of it. Your land sits atop the only viable spring for miles. My father died believing there was water under our land. Never found it." Glay's smile widened. "He was closer than you know. I have surveyors, equipment." He pulled out a deed. "I'll sign over the eastern parcel with the spring. Your debt cleared, water rights secured." "For what?" "Marry my daughter Margaret." Jonas stared, certain he'd misheard. "Your daughter. She's, substantial in size, not a beauty, 26 and unlikely to find a husband otherwise." Glay sipped his whiskey. "You need water? I need her settled. Simple transaction." Jonas stood to leave, disgust rising in his throat. "Your father died in an accident after finding something in that dried-up well," Glay added softly. "Would be a shame if history repeated itself." Jonas froze. "That's a dangerous accusation." "Not accusing, just reminiscing." Glay slid the deed across the table. "Sunday, the church, one ceremony, and you keep your land, gain water rights, and live to see 40. He checked his pocket watch. "I need your answer now." 3 days later, Jonas stood at the altar of Dust Creek's whitewashed church, wearing his father's threadbare suit and a holstered Colt beneath his vest. The pews held only a handful of townsfolk, drawn by morbid curiosity. Their whispers filled the room. Selling himself to keep his dirt. Calloway name ain't worth much anymore. When Margaret Glay entered, the whispers died. She moved with surprising grace for her size, head held high despite the poorly concealed snickers. Her dark blue dress strained at the seams, but her eyes, sharp, intelligent, assessing, caught Jonas off guard. This was no timid, desperate woman. Something in her gaze spoke of calculation, of purpose. Horace Glay stood in the back, smiling like a man who'd just swindled a fortune. The vows were exchanged without emotion. When Jonas slid the simple brass ring onto Margaret's finger, he noticed calluses on her hands, not the soft skin of a wealthy man's daughter, but the hands of someone who worked hard. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced. Jonas leaned forward, intending a brief peck on the cheek. Margaret turned her face slightly, whispering words only he could hear. "Trust nothing. Tell no one." Before he could respond, Glay approached, handing Jonas the deed with a flourish. "Congratulations, son. Welcome to the family." That night, Jonas drove the wagon to Callaway Ranch in silence, Margaret seated beside him, a single carpet bag in her lap. The property came into view, a small house with peeling paint, broken fences, barren fields where cattle once grazed. A monument to 3 generations of Callaway men, now reduced to dust and desperation. Jonas helped Margaret down, expecting tears or complaints. Instead, she surveyed the property with a critical eye. "The house can wait," she said, heading directly to the barn. Confused, Jonas followed. Inside, Margaret lit a lantern and moved to the far corner, where his father had abandoned an attempt to deepen the well years ago. She knelt, producing measuring tools from her bag, and began examining the ground with professional precision. "What are you doing?" Jonas asked. Margaret ignored him, making careful notes in a small book. Jonas stepped closer. "I asked what?" In one fluid motion, Margaret stood and pressed a small revolver against his ribs. "Don't move, Mr. Callaway." Her voice had changed, sharper, commanding. "I need to know right now if you're part of this." "Part of what?" "Lower the damn gun!" "Your father found something here, didn't he? Something Glay wanted badly enough to kill for." Jonas's hand moved toward his own weapon, but Margaret pressed harder. "I'll shoot before you clear leather. Answer me." "My father believed in an underground river, spent years looking, died in that well when the rope broke." Something in his voice must have convinced her. Margaret lowered the gun slowly. "The rope didn't break," she said, "and your father was right about the water." While Margaret continued her examination, Jonas rifled through her carpet bag. Beneath carefully folded clothes, he found a map of the county with detailed water table markings and a badge hidden in a false bottom. Engraved on it, "Sarah Morgan, Arizona Territorial Survey Office." He raised his father's revolver as she turned. "Who the hell are you?" The woman looked at him steadily. "Not Margaret Glay, that's certain." She gestured to the badge in his hand. "The question is, Jonas Callaway, are you an enemy or an ally?" Francaturi. Part 2. Secrets Unearthed. The lantern cast long shadows across the barn as Jonas kept his gun trained on the woman before him. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the weathered wood. "Start talking," Jonas demanded, "before I drag you back to town." "The name's Sarah Morgan. I'm a federal agent investigating Horace Glay for land fraud and corruption." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "The real Margaret Glay died 8 months ago, beaten to death by her father, though the official record says typhoid. And you expect me to believe your father didn't die by accident. He found evidence of an extensive underground aquifer. Glay had him killed because it threatened his water monopoly." Sarah took a step forward, ignoring the gun. "Glay caught me gathering evidence last year. Gave me a choice: become his daughter or disappear like the others who crossed him." Jonas's finger tightened on the trigger. "Convenient story. Check the southeast corner of this barn, under the 3rd floorboard. Your father left something there." Jonas hesitated, then backed toward the spot she indicated, keeping his weapon raised. He knelt, pried up the weathered plank with one hand. Beneath it lay an oilskin packet, untouched for years. Inside, a faded map, his father's handwriting marking water channels, and a letter addressed to him. As Jonas read, his face hardened. His father had discovered not only water, but evidence of Glaze forgeries, stolen land grants, falsified deeds. The letter ended with a warning. If you're reading this, I'm likely dead by Glaze hand. Jonas lowered his gun slowly. Why marry me? Why not just arrest him? Glay owns the local judge, the sheriff, half the territorial legislature. I needed access to this land to complete your father's survey and gather physical evidence. Sarah gestured to the half-dug shaft. And I needed someone who might help me once they learned the truth. So I'm just a convenient pawn. Jonas's voice was bitter. You're a survivor with every reason to want justice. Sarah's eyes flashed. Glay's planning something worse than land theft. There's mercury beneath that silver mine. If he diverts the aquifer for mining operations, he'll poison water across 3 counties. Before Jonas could respond, hoofbeats approached outside. Sarah doused the lantern. They crouched in darkness as a rider circled the property, then departed. His men are watching, Sarah whispered. We don't have much time. Dawn found them in the abandoned mine shaft beneath the western pasture. Jonas's father had followed the water table here, digging nearly 40 feet before his death. The air was damp, the first moisture Jonas had felt in months. He was right, Jonas said, touching the seeping rock wall. Water's here. Sarah examined the rock face with a geologist's precision. Not just water, an entire underground river system, enough to irrigate the whole valley if properly tapped. They worked through the morning, clearing debris, Sarah taking measurements while Jonas reinforced the shaft walls. For the first time in years, hope flickered in him. Not just for his land, but for justice. A shotgun blast from above shattered the silence. Company, Jonas muttered, drawing his revolver. They climbed hastily to find 2 of Glay's men searching the barn. Jonas emerged first, firing twice. One man fell, the other returned fire. A bullet grazed Jonas's arm before Sarah emerged behind him, her small revolver barking twice. The second man collapsed. You're hit, she said, examining his wound. I've had worse. Jonas bound it quickly with a bandana. But they'll send more. We need help. I know someone, Sarah said, if he's still alive. They found Mason Everett in a dilapidated shack outside town, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles. Once the county's most respected lawman, now a hollow-eyed drunk who flinched at sudden movements. You're a fool, Sarah, Mason said after hearing their story. Glay will kill you both. He already tried to kill my father, Jonas replied. I'd rather die fighting than lose everything. Something in Jonas's words reached through Mason's alcoholic haze. Your father was a good man. Tried to warn me about Glay. He pulled a battered tin star from beneath his mattress. Got this taken away when I wouldn't look the other way. Help us, Sarah urged. We need evidence to convince the federal judge in Tucson. Mason studied them, then dumped his whiskey onto the dirt floor. Glay has men watching the telegraph office in the trails, but I know another way to reach the federal marshal. Over the next week, Jonas and Sarah transformed the ranch into a fortress, while Mason reconnected with trusted former deputies. They reinforced the barn, dug defensive positions, and continued mapping the aquifer. Sarah taught Jonas about water engineering. He showed her how to improve her shooting. In town, attitudes shifted when Sarah saved the general store owner's son from a rattlesnake bite, using medical knowledge from her years in the field. The townsfolk began to whisper new stories about Jonas Calloway standing tall again, about his unusual wife, who knew more than any woman should. Mason slipped away to Tucson, returning with word that federal Judge Harlan would arrive in 3 days. We need documented proof of the forged deeds, he told them. They're in the bank vault. That night, Sarah crept into town while Jonas created a diversion at the saloon. She successfully broke into the bank, photographing ledgers and deeds, but was spotted by Deputy Warren. a man they'd thought sympathetic to their cause. The chase through town was chaos. Sarah's horse leapt boardwalks and crashed through market stalls. A bullet struck her shoulder as she cleared the town limits. She made it 2 miles before collapsing from her mount. Jonas found her unconscious in the dirt, blood soaking her shirt. He carried her home, removed the bullet, and stayed by her side through the night. When fever took her, he bathed her brow, speaking softly about his father, the ranch, the future he'd once imagined. Dawn broke as Sarah's eyes finally opened. "Did I get them?" she whispered. Jonas smiled grimly, showing her the photographs she'd protected even while bleeding. "Every last one." She attempted to rise. "Glay will come now. Full force." "Let him," Jonas said, checking his Winchester. "This ends today." As darkness fell, they saw them. A dozen riders approaching from the east, torches blazing against the night sky. At their head rode Horace Glay and Deputy Warren, shotguns across their saddles. "Ready the water pumps," Sarah told Mason. "When I signal, open the floodgates." Jonas took position on the roof, rifle ready. His grandfather had built this home. His father had died protecting its secrets. Now the last Calloway would make his stand. Part 3. A Reckoning in Dust. The riders approached in a wide formation, torches cutting through the darkness like vengeful stars. Jonas steadied his breathing, finger resting lightly on his rifle's trigger. From his position on the roof, he could see Sarah's slight frame in the shadows of the barn, ready to trigger their defenses. Mason Everett, the broken lawman finding his courage again, whispered from nearby. 12 men, armed to the teeth." "We only need to hold until morning," Jonas replied. "Judge Harlan reaches Dust Creek at dawn." The first shot came without warning, Deputy Warren firing at a shadow by the corral. The battle erupted instantly. Jonas's rifle cracked 3 times, dropping one rider and sending others scrambling for cover. Mason's shotgun roared, scattering another group. "Now!" Jonas shouted. Sarah pulled the lever they'd constructed from his father's irrigation designs. Water, precious, salvation-bringing water, surged from the underground pumps they'd worked day and night to build. It flooded the open ground before the house, turning hard-packed dirt into treacherous mud that swallowed men's boots and bogged down horses. In the confusion, Glay's men fired wildly, their shots splintering wood but finding no targets. Sarah used the distraction to ignite her homemade smoke bombs, canisters filled with chemicals from the abandoned silver refinery, sending choking clouds across the battlefield. Through the haze, Jonas spotted Glay shouting orders, trying to rally his forces. One clean shot could end it all. He sighted down the barrel, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. Click. Misfire. Glay heard the sound and looked up, his face contorting in rage. He raised his shotgun toward the roof. The blast tore through the night, but it wasn't Glay's. Mason had fired, sending Glay diving from his horse moments before it collapsed, pinning the land baron's leg beneath its weight. The animal thrashed in panic as Glay's torch rolled against its saddle, setting the leather ablaze. Screams cut through the gunfire, not of anger, but of pure agony as the flames spread to Glay's trapped leg. Without hesitation, Jonas abandoned his position, sliding down the sloped roof and dropping to the muddy ground. Bullets kicked up dirt around him as he sprinted toward the burning horse and the man who'd had his father killed. "Cover him!" Sarah shouted, firing her revolver at the closest attackers. Jonas reached Glay, dragged him free of the thrashing animal, and rolled him through the mud to extinguish the flames. The land baron's leg was badly burned, his face twisted in shock at his enemy's actions. "Why?" Glay gasped through pain. Jonas didn't answer. He hoisted Glay over his shoulder and fought his way back toward the house through the crossfire. The tide turned as Mason's allies, 3 former deputies who'd been waiting in the hills, opened fire from behind Glay's forces. Caught in the crossfire, most of the hired guns surrendered or fled into the darkness. Only Deputy Warren continued fighting, charging toward the barn where Sarah was reloading. Jonas saw the threat and dropped Glay roughly, drawing his Colt. But before he could fire, Warren's shotgun boomed. Sarah cried out, falling against the barn door as buckshot tore through her side. Jonas's world narrowed to a single point of focus. His revolver barked 3 times in rapid succession. Warren staggered, then collapsed face first into the mud. In the sudden silence, Jonas knelt beside Sarah, pressing his bandana against her wound. "Stay with me," he whispered. "We're almost there." Her eyes fluttered. "The evidence. In my satchel." Behind them, Glay had dragged himself to Warren's fallen shotgun. Mason shouted a warning as Glay raised the weapon toward Jonas's back. Sarah saw it first. With strength born of desperation, she shoved Jonas aside as the shotgun roared. The blast caught her shoulder instead of Jonas's spine. Even wounded, Jonas's return fire was deadly accurate. Horace Glay slumped backward, eyes wide with disbelief, his empire dying with him. Dawn broke over Dust Creek as Federal Judge Harlan convened an emergency court session in the town hall. The building overflowed with townsfolk, murmurs rising as Jonas entered, arm in a sling, face haggard from a sleepless night at Sarah's bedside. Sarah herself was wheeled in on a chair borrowed from the barber shop, pale but alert, evidence files clutched in her good hand. For 3 hours the truth unfolded. Forged land grants, murdered witnesses, contaminated water sources, and the plot to monopolize the territory's future. When Sarah revealed her true identity and purpose, gasps echoed through the hall. Judge Harlan examined the evidence methodically. "These charges are the most severe I've seen in 20 years on the bench," he announced. "This court finds sufficient evidence to convict the late Horace Glay posthumously of fraud, corruption, and murder." A cheer began to rise, but Harlan raised his hand for silence. "However, there remains the matter of Sarah Morgan's deception, impersonating Margaret Glay, entering into a fraudulent marriage." He peered over his spectacles. "These are serious offenses. The law demands accountability." Jonas stood, his voice carrying to the rafters. "If she's guilty, then arrest me too. I knew the truth and still fought alongside her." "You were deceived, Mr. Calloway," the judge countered. "No," Jonas's voice hardened. "I was saved. My land, my future, this entire valley, all saved because one person was willing to risk everything for justice." He turned to face the townsfolk. "How many of us suspected Glay's corruption but did nothing? She came here alone and faced what we all feared." One by one, others stood. The storekeeper whose son Sarah had saved, Mason with his tarnished star pinned to his chest again, even the banker who'd been ready to foreclose on Jonas's land. Judge Harlan removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "The law allows for extraordinary circumstances." He cleared his throat. "In light of the service rendered to this territory and the testimony of these citizens, I am granting Miss Morgan a full pardon. The marriage, however, remains legally void." 3 months later, the first crops sprouted in fields that had been barren for years. The underground river properly tapped through the engineering Sarah had learned in the territorial survey, now fed irrigation channels across the valley. At the highest point of Calloway Ranch, Jonas built a small cabin where Sarah stayed while recovering, teaching local farmers about water conservation. Their relationship remained undefined, not husband and wife, not merely friends, but something forged in fire and blood. On the day the first harvest were gathered, Jonas found Sarah standing by the small memorial he'd built for his father and for the real Margaret Glay, 2 victims of the same tyrant. "I've been offered a permanent position with the survey office," she said without preamble, "overseeing water rights for the entire territory." Jonas nodded, feeling a weight settle in his chest. "You'd be good at that." "It would mean traveling, but—" She hesitated, then met his eyes. I'd need a home base, somewhere central. He looked across the green fields that had once been dust. This land sits at the heart of 3 counties. It does? A smile touched her lips. And it already has the best water engineer in Arizona. Jonas extended his hand and she took it, their calluses matching. No flowery declarations passed between them, no promises except the unspoken one, to build something that would last. "I'm married for dirt," Jonas said, looking out over the valley. "Found something worth more than gold." Behind them, the newly constructed windmill turned in the breeze, pulling life-giving water from the depths his father had died to protect, ensuring it would flow for generations to come.